To paraphrase Lionel Richie, Putin is once, twice, three times a failure, and we all laugh at you. That's according to France's President Emmanuel Macron, who has labeled Putin a triple failure because of the stupid decisions that he has made that have placed Russia on the brink of collapse. And to add injury to that stinging insult, Macron went a step further. He just slapped Putin with a bomb by arming Ukraine so that it's ready to finish the job on Putin's fiasco of an invasion. Macron laid it all bare in an ex-post that marked the 4th anniversary of Putin's failed invasion, where he said, "This war is a triple failure for Russia, military, economic, and strategic." Macron isn't wrong. And as we move through the video, we're going to expose just how badly Russia has failed on all three of these fronts. But for now, let's start with the first failure, militarily. Macron sums up Russia's military situation in an incisive quote that cuts right to the heart of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. More than 1.2 million Russian soldiers have been wounded or killed, the highest number of Russian combat casualties since the Second World War, he declares on X, adding that Russia is now resorting to hiring people from the African continent, many of whom have no military training, just so he can maintain the illusion of Russia's manpower advantage in Ukraine. What we see here is desperation on Putin's part, and the hiring of African soldiers goes much deeper. As the Atlantic Council reported on February 19th, Russia has hired around 20,000 so-called soldiers from around the world since Putin launched his invasion. Many of these soldiers come from former Soviet republics and smaller nations in South Asia and the Middle East, but an increasing number are coming from the African continent. As Putin attempts to trick African people into fighting for his ambitions under the guise of Russia helping their countries, over 1,400 African nationals now serve in Russia's army, though around a fifth of those have already been reported dead. Those who take the Kremlin's bait end up serving with Russian soldiers who treat them no better than abused dogs. Russia's African soldiers, and this probably goes for all of the country's foreign recruits, are labeled as disposable, the Atlantic Council reports, showcasing how Russia is searching for cannon fodder wherever it can find it. The growing number of African recruits is naturally sparking alarm worldwide. But Putin may see all of this as a sign of Russia's military strength, an example of just how deep Russia's tendrils run into other nations. It isn't, far from it. Russia is increasingly relying on soldiers from overseas because Putin has led a failing military campaign that has cost the lives of so many Russian soldiers that the Kremlin is now struggling to replace those that it is losing to the Ukraine meat grinder. Macron is bang on the money when he says that Putin's invasion has been a military failure, and we see that in the state of Russia's recruiting right now. For the first time since Putin launched his supposed special military operation, Russia is losing more soldiers than it is recruiting. RBC Ukraine reports that Western officials say that Russia has lost more soldiers in Ukraine than it has been able to recruit for the past 3 months leading up to February. And when Russia's recruitment for those months stands at between 30,000 and 35,000 people, that gives you an indicator of just how extensive Russia's losses in Ukraine have been toward the end of 2025 and into 2026. Putin is now so desperate that he is edging closer to being forced into taking the unpopular step of mobilizing Russia for war, which would see him sacrifice political support for a pipe dream of taking Ukraine. But he's likely going to have to do it. As Army Inform reported on February 21st, Russia has increased the payments it's offering to volunteers who sign military contracts from 1.5 million rubles to 4.5 million rubles, which amounts to an increase from about $19,500 to over $58,000. Russia isn't doing this because it's rolling in money. Remember, the second failure that Macron notes is economic, as we'll get to in a moment. Russia is upping the payments out of desperation because not enough people are signing up for a war in which Putin's only strategy revolves around Russia having a manpower advantage. Add to this all of the equipment losses, which Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says amount to over 11,700 tanks. nearly 800 aircraft and choppers, and more than 24,000 armored vehicles, among much, much more. And you can only reach one conclusion: Russia's military is weaker now than it was before Putin launched his Ukraine war. The soldiers that Russia now has are little more than untrained cannon, fodder capable of doing little more than running in the direction that a commander points them, before they get destroyed by Ukraine's defenses. Russia's military hardware, at least what's left of it, is often ancient. And according to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has blown over $124.6 billion on military equipment that it has lost in Ukraine. Never mind all that it has spent on building new equipment that will soon be lost too. And that brings us thusly to the second of Putin's failures: economy. We will also continue to target Russia's war economy. We will stay the course on sanctions and press ahead with action against the shadow fleet, Macron declares in his ex-post, indicating that sanctions have played a huge role in Russia's existing and emerging economic woes. Those sanctions have added to the economic pain caused by Russia's war spending, which has topped $1 trillion after 4 years, and the stagnation that has now enveloped Russia's entire economy. We'll get to that stagnation in a minute. First, Russia is being squeezed constantly on the sanctions front. According to Castellum, Russia is currently being targeted with 26,655 sanctions that have been implemented since 2014. The US, the UK, Canada, Switzerland, France, Australia, and Japan all contribute to these sanctions, as does the European Union, or EU, of which France is a part. Of these 26,655 sanctions, 23,960 have been implemented since Putin launched the Ukraine invasion in February 2022. Those sanctions, even when not enforced as well as they could be, were estimated to have cost Russia at least $450 billion between February 2022 and June 2025. It's likely that the number has far exceeded $500 billion since, especially as more sanctions have been added since June 2025, and yet more will come, as Macron indicated. In fact, February 24th alone brought with it the announcement that the UK has created a landmark sanctions package to mark the 4th anniversary of the Ukraine war. Almost 300 new sanctions have been announced by the country, including several that focus on Russia's oil exports and energy revenue, along with companies that supply military equipment for Putin's war. Combine these sanctions with Russia's massive war expenditure and a host of other measures, such as Ukraine's own flying sanctions that have devastated Russia's oil sector, and you get a recipe for a country that is in economic collapse, all due to Putin's failures. As The Guardian reported on February 6th, Russia's economy is officially stagnating. After a couple of years of growth that only existed because of the military-industrial complex that Putin created, Russia's gross domestic product, or GDP, growth has flatlined. That GDP growth was just 0.6% in 2025, and even the best estimates from the International Monetary Fund project that Russia's GDP growth in 2026 will only amount to 0.8%. And that seems to be a best-case scenario. It's not like Russia is in any sort of position to reverse this trend, at least not quickly. We've already mentioned the country experiencing more than 1.2 million casualties in Ukraine, along with the impact that has had on Russia militarily. But this massive loss of people comes at a time when Russia has plunged headfirst into a demographic crisis that has left it short of labor and increasingly vulnerable to trading migrant work, and thus Russia's entire identity for Putin's invasion in Ukraine. As Dr. Marek Dubrovsky of the Bruegel think tank tells The Guardian, Russia doesn't have the potential for rapid growth. The war-related business climate is, of course, part of the story, but the major story here is the long-term demographics. It hasn't changed. Russia's rate of inflation has consistently been well above that experienced by the Eurozone. The UK and the US since late 2023, having exceeded 10% for several months in 2025, Russia is trying to plug its financial gaps with short-term and damaging measures. such as increasing corporate tax from 20% to 25% and raising value-added tax from 20% to 22%, which means Putin is passing on the cost of his failure to his own people as Russia generates less and less revenue under the weight of sanctions. And still, Putin pours billions into a war that has seen Russia make no strategic gains for years. That brings us to the third failure, which is Russia's strategic collapse. But before we get to that, and remember that we still have Macron's bomb-shaped slap to Putin's face to get to, you're watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this comes from. So make sure you subscribe if you're getting value from our analysis. Now, on the strategic side of things, we could talk at length about how Russia hasn't made any notable gains in Ukraine, and certainly none that could be considered war-shifting for over 3 years. That is Putin's failure, perhaps a bonus fourth failure, if you like, on its own. However, Macron's indictment of Putin's third failure is more about how Russia's position of geopolitical power has collapsed in the wake of the Ukraine invasion. We'll allow Macron to explain. It has strengthened NATO. The very expansion are